Our next interview is with John Thomson of Bartleby's Books in Washington, D.C. And John, give us a little bit about your background, family, schools, where you grew up, siblings, what your parents did, etc. Take us up through high school.
Well, my high school, I got to ninth grade.
Okay.
My father was in the service. I was in by ninth grade, I'd been in about 20 schools. Traveled all over, was born in Frankfurt, Germany. And then in 10th grade, I was on my own. My parents separated. I briefly lived on a pasture farm out in Kansas. Then came back, lived with my father. And he moved on, and I moved on. So I was on my own.
From what age?
About 14.
And where did you live when you were on your own?
Scranton, Pennsylvania. I was a dishwasher and a short order cook. And then shortly after that, a couple of years after that, I'd been lying about my age and ended up in getting my mother to sign for me, and I went in the service.
What branch?
Navy.
And how long were you in?
About a year.
And then what happened?
I decided I had no idea about the war or anything about that, and I became politically involved.
Okay. What particular era was this? What year? Can you remember?
Yep, I can remember. 69, 70.
Okay, so now you're out of the Navy. Now what are you doing?
First I was a house painter. Started my own company, and then I was a welder out at Grove Crane.
Where's Grove Crane?
Greencastle, Pennsylvania. And then I came back to Washington, D.C. with some service people I knew. One of my friends had a child with congenital heart disease, and they were at Children's there, and they sort of needed somebody to be in the house and sort of settle it. And I needed a part-time job back in those days for cigarettes and coffee. And I got a job in a bookstore.
Well, whose bookstore was it?
Boy. Now this would not have been Antiquarian or used. It's called Horizon Bookshop, and it was run by two double-day salesmen who weren't supposed to be, I think, in business for themselves, but it was later sold to Marlboro. But I found I knew books. I'd read all my life, course of moving around a lot. I read. I didn't have a lot of friends or associates. It clicked. I knew more than they did. I began ordering the books. Somebody hired me away from them. I worked for Kramer Books.
Where were they?
They were in Washington, D.C. too. And then I went, I can't remember whether, I worked briefly for Second Story about 8 months.
And that was enough?
That was enough. And I can't remember, I guess I worked, one of the people, there was a warehouse involved with Kramer's, there was a remainder, and one of the guys came out, and I, with two other people, formed Daedalus Books, which was a remainder outfit, and did that for a couple of years, opened a new bookstore called Calliope, and then moved on from there, began to scout books, sell them to Bill Hale, some to Larry McMurtry, and eventually it sort of worked for everybody I could, and went into business for myself when I discovered I couldn't quite make a living on scouting. And we opened a new and used bookstore. I I quit when I had a 4-year-old and a child, and not much money in my pocket. Looking back, it didn't make much sense.
What was that how you started Bartleby's?
That's how I started Bartleby's, and we were half new and half used.
Where does the name Bartleby's come from?
It comes from a Herman Melville short story. It's called Bartleby the Scrivener, or Tale of Wall Street. It's a fairly ambiguous story, which seemed just about right for going in the book business.
And so, did you start with your wife at the time, or did you just by yourself?
No, it was my wife. It's been my wife and I. That's
Since the
been our
beginning.
full employment since the beginning.
And when did you open the shop called Bartleby's?
Be about 27 years ago, according to my wife.
According to your wife? So
Yeah, she does dates better than I do.
And you say it was used and new?
It was used and new when I began.
What percentage?
Half and half.
Just about half an hour?
Yep, split it down the middle, thought, I'd just be able to have the books everybody wanted. And quickly found out that they were two different crowds. And the people who came in and bought new never looked at the used, and the people that bought used might occasionally buy a new thing.
Do you still have that same concept?
No.
When did you switch over to all antiquarian?
About 2 years into it, the paperwork of doing new books, and we were selling single copies, not hundreds of copies of things, just got too much for us. And
How many employees do you have now?
one,
Just one.
besides my wife.
Besides you
myself.
and your wife.
Yeah.
And is that sufficient for what you want to do?
Yes, actually, we've only had a full-time employee for a few years now. We had, earlier we had a couple of employees and ran a bigger operation. We just lost our lease, so in July next year we'll be closing the store, and at this point, it takes 5 years to sort of recoup your costs and get your customers to find you again. It's not worth it.
So this will be the end of an open shop for you.
This will be the end of an open shop for me.
So you'll still do business by appointment, I would imagine.
Do business by appointment, book fairs,
Do you have-
catalogs, and internet.
Have you issued any catalogs?
We issued about, I want to say about 30 catalogs. I have to say in the past 5 years since we've been in this new shop, the cash flow has been sufficient, and that I've sort of dropped off. I do quotes of particular items and have not done.
What percentage of your business would you say comes from the shop, from the internet, and from book fairs?
I'd say probably about a third of our business comes from shop. I'd say probably almost 60% of the rest come from either book fair or quotes to customers. Direct sales, and under 10% probably come from the internet.
So do you have a strong internet presence?
I have a website. I'm up on 3 or 4 sites. I deal primarily in Americana, though I'm a general antiquarian, might pick up anything. We have a lot of paper. It doesn't particularly well suit itself to the internet without a little more visual than I've given it yet.
Mm-hmm.
We'll probably, in transition, we'll probably try and bring ourselves into the 21st century with the technology to make it seem more like a shop.
Yeah, since you won't have that presence on the street anymore, you're going to need to do something. Was your transition to the internet a difficult or an easy situation for you?
We began using a computer at some time. We had a database, and at one point we just began dumping what was left over of our catalogs up onto line. and that's really all we've done.
Really?
And recently, I don't know, past 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, we've added a website, and with a shopping cart and direct sales.
What matching services are you up on?
We're on Alibris, the ABAA site, and I think that's it.
Okay. Talk a little bit about some of the people who mentored you or who you used as sounding boards or who were helpful to you when you first started in the book business.
Well, I began as a reader, and so I began securing a reader's shop pre-internet days. It was easy to do. Washington being a fairly expensive place, you'd go to the book barns and the bookstores of New England. You'd often be able to drag back not terribly expensive books, but books that there were a market for in the city. I used to have a trip I did from Washington where I'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and be sitting in Chatham, New Jersey at 10 o'clock when they opened, and I'd do Chatham and Morristown, and then one other store, which I don't remember. It may have been an antique shop, and then I'd hit the Cranberry Bookworm on my way home, and I'd be home by 9 o'clock at night. We sort of, we had at that time we had a kid and all, and my wife was running the shop. We had no employees. So basically I did quick trips out and back. I really was more of a hunter and gatherer, and a lot of my business was with other dealers. I learned what they wanted, the specialists, and I gathered books and sold them to them.
Who were some of those people that you did business with early on in your career?
Well, early on, I'd say Robert Rubin. I had mentioned previously that I began scouting and selling books to Bill Hale and McMurtry, who were local book dealers there. One of my mentors, I'd have to say, was Frank Socia, who was up there. He was, as I said previously, I had no money, and I showed up at his place, and it was like heaven. And I began stacking up the books and had a big pile there, and then I began to figure how much money I had and cut back and told him I could take this much now, and I'd be back in 2 weeks after the shop opened, and I'd like, if he could hold them, I'd pick them up then, figuring my cash flow would get me. And Frank said, you pay what you can, he said, and you take them all now.
Yeah.
And on another trip, I went up, I'd sleep in his house, and he took me in and took me around to other book dealers, showed me the ropes. He was a wonderful guy.
He was really good to you.
Yeah, he was very good to me. And he's probably, in terms of mentor, was the closest thing I had. He was generative spirit and shared his knowledge. He was, in many respects, more interested in literature than I was. But I made, and I should say that Quill and Brush, the Aherns, were responsible for getting us our first store lease. Pat managed the building of what we referred to as Dead Book Mall. It was a mall that was not doing particularly well in a transition area of town at the time. They're now $1 million condos on the spot.
Yeah,
but
I know the feeling.
But they got me the lease. We had no money, and it was only by Pat's word we really got lease. The guy's name was J. Kingdon Gould III. And I remember being interviewed by him, and Karen and I, and every question he asked, we ended up sounding so non-business-like. I thought, this is not going well. But he finally asked, so what do you owe? And I said, oh, we got this one, you know. Said, we don't owe anybody anything. And he looked across that big desk of his and he said, I've always thought that people that didn't know how to use other people's money were stupid. And so I just...
There's a lesson there.
Yeah, there was a lesson there. I never learned it, unfortunately.
Well, none of us do, unfortunately, is right.
Yeah.
Frank Scotia was a really nice person.
Oh, he was incredible. And he, you know, and so much of the trade knew him.
Yeah.
He touched so much of it.
Yeah.
And he'd show up at a, he'd show up, you'd be driving down the road, and he'd see a house sale that had some books out. He'd pull the car over,
Right.
jump out and get it.
Yeah, that's the way
If
it
there wasn't a
used to
book
be.
he wouldn't look at.
Yeah. What aspects of the book business have changed since the internet began, and how have those changes affected your way of doing business, if at all?
Well, I think, what is the word they would use? The book business has become, in a certain sense, more transparent in terms of pricing than it was. Some of the information we worked hard to get, or by gathering specialist catalogs we learned the pricing of, quickly became out there for the most part. I mean, there's still things you know
Yeah, sure.
that don't, but an awful lot of it has become common knowledge. And somebody that doesn't even deal in books, maybe does yard sales or selling their grandmother's books, can get up online, put their books up and price them out. Whether they're right or not, you don't know until you see them. But I think that's probably one of the biggest changes. As I said, I used to drive Ohio up from all the way out to Missouri and all the way down to Florida and all the way up to Maine, Michigan and all. I drive all of those, work in antique shops and bookstores. I sort of, you know, tried to stay out of everybody else's way and find my own path. But you can't do that anymore. That stuff's all priced out there, just as it should be, or even sometimes more than I would price it anymore.
Also, all that information, as you said, that we spent a career putting together is available for anybody who just wakes up one morning and puts on the internet.
Yeah, and well, my transition has been, even though I still spend too much time looking at the books, we probably do more selling paper of various sorts.
Ephemera?
Ephemera, broadsides. We've just, you know, the books market has, in a certain sense, I still sell a lot of books. And though probably without the shop I'll lose a lot of that ability too. A lot of what I used to sell in catalog is not sellable in catalog anymore.
Yeah.
But I could still sell it in shops at a reasonable price.
I think the word reasonable is pretty important right there.
Yeah. Well, we used to do a service to institutions and all that, you know, maybe the books were available out there for $3 to $5 that we would catalog at 15 or 20. But we gathered them together, we put them in lists and categorized them in ways that made sense for that librarian to go down that list and pop those books off. Now he can hit a button and get those books if he's looking for it. Though there's still some librarians who find that the best method of shopping, not of enough of them to justify those books.
What percentage of your business is collectors, librarians, and other dealers?
I would guess probably over half of my sales are other dealers.
Other dealers?
Collectors would probably be the smallest part, and institutions have grown from virtually nothing to probably 25.
Is that particular part of your business constantly growing, or do you feel it's sort of like topped out?
It's still grown, I think only because I did so little with it in the beginning. I think it will probably top out, but I was not very aggressive and hadn't made contact with many or done that. I find we've been able to do some with some librarians and not anything with others. I can't explain it. And when I say I don't do anything with collectors, in terms of quoting, I don't have a large number of collectors I can quote to. In the shop, we sell a lot of things, but I don't. That's a more passive form of book selling.
What about at book fairs? There used to be a buzz, a sort of electricity during book fairs that I feel is conspicuously absent in this day and age. Is it because of the internet?
Well, it's not just because of the internet. I think, there was always that sense of people bringing material that was fresh to the market. And I think, yes, because most of this material's been run, a good bit of it may have been involved in the internet. Though I think a lot of people hold back and bring things forward at a fair. I think we all know small regional book fairs where somebody might come from a different region and sell things that perhaps they didn't want to show in their own area for whatever reason. But I think, yes, that sense of availability, of constant availability, where the book fair was the only way that came, has changed it. I do think that, but I think we have to work harder to create that buzz. I think we have to figure out another way, either by education or by adding things on to the book fair that make it an event again.
For example?
Well, the lecture we're going to have by Michael Suarez. I think we need to do more with educating people about why books are. The thing I'll miss most about the shop is the ability to browse, that people make discoveries that way, but we become such a society of pinpoint. We can only answer the questions we know, and we go out asking them. There's not that ability to make discovery. I mean, legal people talk about it. Lawyers talk about the young lawyers not being able to find anything because they just hit on the law, and this pops up what they need, and they don't find those cases that might work, that have never been used in that fashion. And the same is true in books, in a larger sense. There are books that add considerable value to a subject area that may not have been in that category.
Here's a question for you, John. Supposing it's now, would you go into the book business at this stage of your life? Could you go into the book business at this stage of your life? We see a lot of young booksellers out there, but...
I look at them, they're finding ways and they're coming along. I look back at when I came in and how undercapitalized I was and wondered what I was thinking, how I thought I would do a business at it. I didn't come along working for somebody else where I had the training to do it. I'm still discovering parts of this business that I really don't know how to do. I guess I think I could just by looking around at the young book dealers doing it, who are doing the same thing I was doing. I mean, in terms of they're underfunded,
right?
And they're making it, and they're finding subject areas and things. I look at, you've got Ian Brabner, you've got Lauren Baer, you've got Brian Cassidy. These are these are young people that are adding tremendous value.
Who's that fellow from Chicago area who's here at the book fair? I can't remember his name.
Michigan area. Is that who
Michigan,
you're thinking? Oh boy, this is going to embarrass me because I
can't remember, so I'll be embarrassed. But,
yeah.
But he's a young bookseller who seems to have an awful lot on the ball.
Yep, he has an awful lot on the ball, and he brings a fresh view of cataloging material and putting it into perspective of stuff. It's a lovely mind, and that's what this business is. It's a mind working, and I can't, I couldn't think of anything. I think I've been lucky to be in this business.
I think a lot of us feel that way. It's been a great trip, etc. Well, you know something? Our 30 minutes are up. I told you it was going to be painless.
Well, I didn't mention Greg Gibson.
You do. You've got a minute.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about Greg, who we all know and love.
He was a friend of mine. I met him on my first trip when I was just gathering books. He was barely in books. I've known him for longer than I think I've been in the business. We've been friends for 30 years, and he wasn't so much a mentor as somebody I've come along with as we've come along in this experience. He became a specialist by what he was, and I've remained a generalist. But over the years, we've done so many road trips, and then I have to mention Lynn Respis, who I've partnered up with, and we've bought and sold books, and he's been, the thing in this business is when you're dealing with straight people, you never have to question it, and you don't have to watch your back,
That's true.
And it's such a luxury.
It's a great business, isn't it?
It is a great business.
Thanks a lot, John. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mike.